I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is the author of the book The Planets, the sci fi poetry collection, no other than Miss Wendy Van Camp.
Thank you, Daniel. It's wonderful to be.
Welcome to Book 101, Miss Wendy, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
I'd be glad to. My name is Wendy Van Camp, and I am Poet Laureate Emerita from the city of Anaheim, California. My term was 2022 through 2024. I am what is known as a speculative. I think it just stopped again.
I'm still continuing. Wait,
Oh, okay.
I
You're
think,
recording on your side?
yes, go ahead, Miss Wendy.
Let me just,
I'll check on my Facebook if we are recording.
okay.
Yes, we do.
Let me just start over from the top. Hello, my name is Wendy Van Camp. I am Poet Laureate Emerita from the city of Anaheim, California. My term was from 2022 through 2024. I am a speculative poet, which means I write genre poetry in the genre of science fiction and fantasy. I'm also known for my astro poetry. I am an editor of poetry anthologies and I specialize in science fiction poetry. My anthology is called Eccentric Orbits and it's available on Amazon. As of this recording, we just finished our fifth volume, so I'm very proud of the project. I'm also the inaugural editor and creator of a poetry anthology, this time for literary poetry, called Anaheim Poetry Review, which is a community anthology for the poets of my city of Anaheim. And it was a wonderful project. It really brought our community together and is now being taken over by my successor, which I'm very happy about. I'm also a podcaster. I have my own podcast called RWI Ramblecast, which is for my No Wasted Ink newsletter. Basically, I narrate the newsletter and I send it with the text version of the newsletter, but it also resides as its own podcast on Spotify. So you can find it there. I'm also a host for a program called Poets Cafe, which is on SoundCloud. And what I do is I interview poet laureates from around the country. The program originally was on KPFK radio here in Los Angeles, but it has since moved to its archive on SoundCloud. Let's see. I do so many other things, so and I don't want to bore people with a long introduction, but hopefully through the interview we'll talk about more things.
Miss Wendy Van Camp, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. And looking forward for more poetry. So, how can the unique characteristics of each planet inspire sci-fi poetry?
Well, The Planets was a project I started back in, oh my goodness, at least maybe 2016, 2017. And it was something I did kind of on and off. I just knew that eventually I would like to publish my first collection of poetry just as a general poet around the area. Um, but as I was writing, I got very ill. I had a life threatening illness that eventually turned me into a housebound person and I was sort of trapped in my home, just trying to recover from the illness, first not knowing what it was, being diagnosed, having surgery to correct it, and then a good 2 years to recover. And during that time period, I found that I was having memory issues brought about by the illness. And I found that I couldn't focus on longer projects. Before that point, I was a novelist and an artist. And I was traveling with my wares all over California into Las Vegas, Nevada, and other places with my wares. But as the illness progressed, I grew very fatigued and I couldn't remember things. Even people who I knew for many years, I couldn't recognize them when they walked up to me. It was very frightening, to be perfectly honest. But I was diagnosed with something called Cushing's disease, which is when a tumor invades your pituitary gland and takes over its function. And literally, my entire body was dissolving under the onslaught of cortisol hormones, just going 24/7 in my body. So, as I found, I couldn't really even read or write long chapters anymore. I just couldn't stay focused on it. But I found that I could still write short work. So I started writing a lot of essays and publishing them. And I learned about science fiction poetry or sci-fi coup. I took a workshop at a local science fiction convention, and I found the short form appealed to me. I could focus on writing something so short, and in time, I just kept practicing and grew much better. Um, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I took that workshop later. It's a nice story. But anyway, the planets really came about because I had an accident. I lost my balance and I went flying across the room. I broke the fingers in my hand, so I couldn't type anymore. And I had a concussion and I hit my hip. It was awful. But what happened is, after about 3 weeks of not being able to type and trying to struggle with using dictation, I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I can still write with a pen. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to shelve my novella project that I was going to work on that summer. This was back in the summer of 2018. And I told myself, you know what? I'm going to go to the coffee house and sit for a few hours with my fountain pen and notebook. And I'm going to just write these really short poems because I could focus on a smaller project. I could write with a pen and I didn't have to worry about all the dictation and all that. And I found that writing in a paper notebook with a fountain pen opened up a level of creativity I had not experienced in a long time. The analog writing method just seems to work really well with poetry. And in fact, to this day, I still compose all my poetry in a paper book with a pen, be it a fountain pen or regular one. Um, so I basically got all of the work done for the planets. And my idea for the book was very simple. I wanted to write poetry inspired by the 9 planets of the solar system. And yes, I'm of an age where I still think of the solar system as having 9 planets, including Pluto. Um, so I did a lot of research. I researched the physical properties of the planets. I researched our historical connection with the 9 planets of the solar system. And merging these two ideas together, I came up with haiku style poetry that is the basis of all the poems you find in the planets. And I also illustrated the book. I've been doing poetry illustrations of my work, and they were basically submitted to journals, and they would use them as illustrations in their book, in their journal for science fiction prose. They were kind of just little counterpoints. Then I took it upon myself to turn them into art prints, and I've been selling my poetry art prints in my pen and ink style at various science fiction conventions, including Comic Con here in San Diego. So it's been a long process. I found the book was very well accepted. I published it at the very end of 2019. And at the end of 2019, I took it to my local open mic where I was a regular in the Anaheim Library. And I proudly held up my book, which is right here. So I held up my book just like this and I read from it. And after that, the head librarian, put that back there, the head librarian started emailing me, we're looking for a new poet laureate. Why don't you apply? And then the previous poet laureate came up and urged me to put in an application too. But at that time, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. And I went, I'm not worthy to be a poet laureate. I can't do this job. I'm not old enough. Yes, at my age. But so I let the job lapse. I didn't apply for it. And about a week later, I got another email from the librarian. The council has decided to reopen the position for another week. We strongly urge you to apply. So clearly, they wanted me. And by that point, I decided, maybe I could do this job. I started to do a little research about what poet laureates did. And I thought, you know what? I mean, I've been so sick, but I feel recovered enough that I was ready to come back out into the world because my healing over the past 2 years had allowed me to be able to go out again, with caution, of course. But I felt that I might be able to handle this. So I went ahead, applied, I was interviewed, and I even was fingerprinted for the job in 2020. But as we all know, in 2020, a little thing called COVID happened.
Yes.
And literally 3 days after I was fingerprinted for the poet laureate position, the entire city shut down in fear of COVID. And everything closed, all programming whatsoever, including my open mic. Everyone was just too afraid to come out. And I heard nothing after that point. I never officially was given the job. And I finally got an email from the head librarian again about 4 or 5 months later, apologizing profusely. It said, I'm sorry, but they're closing down the program. It could be indefinitely. I don't know if there'll be another poet laureate for the city. And she was felt very badly, and I could just tell it through the letter. And I kind of went, darn, because by that point I wanted to be a poet laureate. So what I decided to do was to research, and I went to other readings by poets laureates. At that point, Zoom had been taking off, and everybody was on Zoom all over the country. I went to about 20 or 30 presentations by poet laureates that talked about what they did. A lot of them were doing anthologies, and I went, darn, I do an anthology too. Other people were podcasting, and I went, gee, I'm out here podcasting all over the place and doing panels and conferences and all that. And then they were saying, oh, and I was doing this kind of community service and blah blah. And every time I heard this, I suddenly began to realize that I did have the skills of a poet laureate, and actually I could probably do a fairly good job. And I didn't know if I would be offered the job again, but I started to make notes and a plan to see what I would do as a poet laureate. So, meanwhile, my book, The Planets, published in the end of 2019, and I had planned to submit it to contests all over the country. I had printed extra books to mail in. I had saved up money to pay for fees. I was even going to submit it to the Pulitzer community. My own hubris, I guess. But I figured, if you don't submit, you're not going to get a chance. So it's
Yes.
better to submit and have them say no than to not submit and basically be guaranteed a no. But what happened is most of these places wouldn't accept the books. People were so afraid to even touch an object touched by another person. Now, I know we don't view it that way now, but remember, this is when COVID was brand new. Nobody knew how this thing was being spread. There was panic everywhere. And most of the contests just shut everything down. They wouldn't even take a PDF. I mean, they just shut it down. And so I did manage to submit to a couple of awards, but maybe five as opposed to the 20 or 30 I originally planned. And then out of the blue, my book was nominated for an Elgin Award for Best Speculative Poetry Collection of the Year. And I was stunned because I didn't even know what an Elgin was at that point. But it turns out it's one of the premier awards for speculative poetry. And at that point, I learned about the SFPA, which is the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association. And I joined the group, got to know people, and learned a lot about speculative poetry. And there are a lot of speculative poets in the world. There were fewer back then, but it's been growing and growing. There's just so many people coming on board writing genre poetry. They love it. And there are so many publications that support it. And they're usually paying markets, which is wonderful. And they have kind of their own award system. So you could win an Elgin for best chapbook or book. You can win a Dwarf Star for micro poetry. So my micro sci-fi coup poems have been nominated for Dwarf Stars. I think I've gotten maybe two, maybe three nominations for that down through the years. There's also the Riesling Award, which the name comes from the blind poet in Robert Heinlein's original book, The Green Hills of Earth. Um, for some people, that's way back, like it was published 50, 60 years ago, but it was considered a really important work in the science fiction genre. And so that's where the name comes from. And you can win a Riesling for a long poem. You can win a Riesling for a short poem. And then super short poems, of course, get the Dwarf Stars. There's a new speculative poetry award just coming on the horizon. This year, 2025, will be when work is eligible for this award. And in 2026 will be when the award comes out, and that is the Nebula Award. The Nebula is sponsored by the SFWA, which is the Science Fiction Writers Association. It's the premier writers association for science fiction and fantasy writers. And I was one of the people who helped implement that award. Our team, the poetry committee, worked very hard for many months, doing all the writing and the proposals, working with the management, and basically doing everything we could to see that this award for poetry would be created. I'm happy to say, as of this recording, it was only certified maybe a month ago. So it's still very new and very fresh, but there are many speculative poets out there that are incredibly excited for the opportunity. And I'm just glad I had a part in implementing all that. But
Miss Wendy, congratulations. Hoping for more awards to come. So, what stories could you tell about hypothetical planets that defy known physics?
so, writing poems about planets that defy known physics.
Yes.
Well, I don't really know of any that defy physics, but the universe is a very big and strange place. There are new exoplanets being discovered every single day. Astronomy is exploding as a science right now. James Webb is seeing to the farthest reaches of the universe and to our very beginnings. And it's showing that maybe our ideas of the Big Bang might be wrong. We might be even seeing primordial universes from before the Big Bang now. So it's all very fascinating. But yes, there are so many planets out there. It's just amazing. Every star has planets, pretty much. I mean, you will very seldom find a star that doesn't have one. And if you multiply the billions of stars in the galaxy, how many more billions of planets there are? I just think that we're going to be able to find things, anything we can imagine, eventually we will be able to find. It's just absolutely fascinating. But I liked writing about our solar system because I think we need to learn about our local neighborhood, so to speak. We are learning new technologies to move to other planets. You've all, I think, have heard about Elon Musk's plan of immigrating people to Mars, and I've written some poetry about that too. But they're looking at a planet, or rather a moon called Titan, and they think that might be a good opportunity for us as well. And even Venus has a hospitable zone. And with the gravity of Venus being close to that of the Earth, and if you're up high in the clouds, the temperature is actually very close to what we would do. Literally, if you could, you can't breathe the air because of the sulfur, but as long as you wore protective clothing to keep the sulfur off you and have a breathing apparatus, you could go out there at a certain altitude. So NASA has been proposing cloud cities to float in the clouds of Venus. We actually have the technology to create those now. It's just a matter of do we want to go there and do that kind of expense. But the science behind all this has been absolutely fascinating. And as a science fiction writer and poet, I've certainly been drawing a lot of inspiration from all these plans NASA's been putting out lately. It's just a lot of fun.
So, Miss Wendy, what is your advice for those people out there who want to write poetry?
Well, you just need to start. And I know a lot of people think of poetry as being something that's very academic and you have to use big, flowy words. And I'm here to say you don't have to. Poetry at its best comes from the street upwards. You just need to write your own personal truth. And you don't even need to write it in a poetry form. You can do free verse. You just need to write what appeals to you. Now, I personally like to write in forms, but most of the forms I choose are happen to be Japanese forms like haibun or haiku, that sort of thing. But you can write whatever form you like, and you don't need to have anything like that. I mean, even people that do rapping on the street, I'm certainly you've probably heard of people getting music contracts and things like that. But at its heart, rap is poetry. It's poetry that was just started on street corners with friends and rapping along and getting better at it and better at it until it blossomed into its own form. And you'll hear a lot of that on the open mics out in LA still to this day.
So, Miss Wendy, what are your short term and long term goals in writing poetry?
Well, my short term goal is to write a second book. I'm calling it, it'll either be called Time and Space or Time and Space and Technology. I'm not sure if I want that third word on there yet, but it'll be similar to the planets in that I plan to have all the poems be sci-fi ku or haiku in form with a scientific kind of bent. But instead of writing about the planets of the solar system, I wanted to write about the interesting things happening in the Milky Way galaxy. So, interesting planets, stars that are doing things that we can't quite explain, and what are our connections with some of these stars, and what kind of things can we foresee in the future with them. And I have maybe half the book written. I just need to find the time to get out and finish the rest. And of course, I'd like to find another cover. I got lucky with the cover for the planets. It just happened to be one of those pre-made covers you find out in the various places, and I just love the red planet coming up. It was just striking, and to this day, my cover seems to draw in people to buy it. So it was a great choice. I'm just hoping lightning will strike twice when I write the sequel. But
Definitely.
I'm also working on prose books too. I had my debut book was called The Curate's Brother, which is a Regency book based off of Jane Austen's book Persuasion. It could be considered a prequel to her book, but it's also the first of four that I had planned to write. But like I said earlier, I got really sick. And at that time, I kind of slowed down with my novel writing, but I'm now recovered. I'm at full strength. I'm full of energy and vibe of life. When you almost die from something, when you survive and you go forward, you want to do everything. You just want to live. And as a writer and a poet, that's what I want to do. I want to give back to my community. I want to continue writing my stories. I want to continue writing poetry, and I want to continue to speak at events. I speak at many conferences and at science fiction conventions as a panelist, but I'm also a writing coach, and I accept clients and I work with them one on one to help their dreams come true. Um, because I have this ability to see pathways. That's how I call it. When I talk to people, I can see ways that they can be successful. And I use that talent when I become a coach. I help people find the easiest path to the success that they see, not a success that I would see, but what they dream. And I really enjoy doing that, seeing people blossom and reach their goals and reach their potential. And I've really been enjoying being a coach this last year or so. And I guess it all started with the poet laureate job where I shepherded an entire community of poets. But I guess I just can't stop myself now. So now I'm a coach on top of everything else. So
So,
it's all been good though.
yeah, so Miss Wendy, to sum up our episode for tonight, what role does humanity's longing to explore new worlds play in shaping your sci-fi cute themes?
Well, I think exploring has been a part of the human nature since the beginning. You take the Polynesians that started in the southern eastern part of Asia. I believe it's yes, southeast of Asia, who crossed the oceans all the way to Peru and settled all the islands in between. They were voyagers. They used their skills of navigation. Then we have the Europeans that set out across the oceans to explore, and well, we won't go too far down there. But again, it's part of human nature to go out and see new things and to develop new places to live. In our current situation, we're now looking at Mars and possibly building a base on the moon. Again, this is humanity going forth as seeds on the wind to colonize new worlds. And I think it's just a part of what we do and what makes us human. And it's all very exciting. And I hope to see more of it. I really want to live long enough to see a colony on Mars. That would be a wondrous thing indeed.
That'd be awesome, yes. And I have one more question about Andromeda Galaxy and the Milky Way will collide sooner or later. Do you agree with those speculations?
I've been thinking about that. In fact, I'm writing some poetry about that collision. If there are advanced civilizations out there, which we don't know, are they fleeing? Because when the two galaxies collide, it's going to be a colossal ending of life. Huge plasma streams are going to result. A new black hole, bigger black hole, will be in the center, and a lot of the places that might have harbored life will disappear, and not only in the Milky Way but in Andromeda as well. And if you are a civilization with the capacity of space flight, wouldn't you be thinking about leaving these things? There's actually a smaller third galaxy nearby which might be proved to be a safe haven. We're obviously nowhere close to doing something like that, but I have to wonder, maybe we should be looking to see if there are things leaving, or planets or something being towed outside of our galaxy with other civilizations fleeing. It might actually be proof that there is life out there. I don't know. Maybe it's a crazy idea, but as a sci-fi writer, we think
Yes.
about things like that.
For sure. But do you think we are so slow inventing things that we're gonna help us in the future?
Mhm. Well, I don't know about slow. I think innovation has been skyrocketing in the last 1 to 200 years. It's like we just can't stop. It's things that I thought of as being science fiction when I was a young girl are now everyday objects. I mean, your cell phone in your hand is a computing power that, when we were making our moonshots with NASA, that was what you have in your hand in the phone is far beyond their capacity. It's just amazing. So many things that we take for granted now are so new, and what's going to come next, who even knows? It's Things are just rapidly changing, almost to a point where you can't keep up with it. But it's also very exciting. It's fun to look at. um, you just need to take what you hear with a grain of salt.
Yes.
and go forward as best you can. And but I love it. You know, where I live here in the Southern California, we actually can see the spaceships that come out from Vandenberg Space Force Base. They literally fly over my house, and we go out with our phone and watch them with binoculars right in our own front yard. I mean, these are spaceships going into outer space, and we can see it with our own eyes. You didn't, that kind of thing you just didn't do 20, 30 years ago. And now I think it's becoming more commonplace wherever you are. So, I mean, it's an exciting time to live. I mean, true, there are problems and things that need to be overcome. And I'm not saying that this is something we shouldn't be concerned about, but there are a lot of very wondrous things going on too. And I think via poetry, it's a way for me to point out some of these wondrous things that maybe the everyday person doesn't think about. But when they hear my poetry about the space program or immigration or talking to whales with GPT, I mean, these are all wonderful topics and not things people think about every day. But when they hear it in a poem, they kind of go, oh, wow, that is an interesting thing. And it makes them pause and think about the wonders of the world. And I think as a poet, that's a wonderful thing.
Miss Wendy Van Kam, thank you again for sharing your poetry to the world and looking forward for more poetry to come. So can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Sure, you can find me on Facebook. I have a page called No Wasted Ink. On Instagram, my Instagram account is also No Wasted Ink. I have a free monthly newsletter, which is nowastedink.substack.com. And if you want to look at my writing coach service, that's on my small press, indigosky.com. And my press is called Indigo Sky Press. So those are places you can find me. Oh, and of course, my website, which is my name, wendyvancamp.com. But you go to any of these places, there are links to all the things I do. And just knock yourself out and have a good time.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Wendy Van Kam because if you support her, as I said, more poetry books to come. So, Miss Wendy, thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. It was a pleasure to be on your show.
More to come, people. See you soon. So, I'm gonna share to you the link.